obviously, we're going to have a legacy in that down the line, people will be saying, why was the Moviescramble podcast not popular? Because it's so good.
Good morning, Vietnam!
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
I feel the need for speed.
Roads? And we're going, we don't need roads. Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Batman.
I am the Father.
Hello and welcome back to the Moviescramble podcast. I am John, for those people who think they recognise the voice from somewhere in the dim and distant past. And today I am joined by one of my superb colleagues. Unfortunately, Thomas is elsewhere. We have the ever lovely Mary. Mary, how are you doing? How's things?
I am so glad to be back podding with you. I've missed you, I've missed Simi, I've missed our one listener. I'm just really excited to be back chatting about films, and I hope everybody's glad to have us back as well.
Brilliant. Apologies for our regular listener who has obviously been pining away and wondering what the hell has happened. How did we all get caught in a tsunami or something? The possibilities are endless, especially when you're talking about movie stories. So apologies everyone for the enforced absence over the last couple of months. It's been scheduling and all sorts of things, trying to get us together in a room. So hopefully this will be the start of us doing a wee bit more regular chats, which will be very nice. I know everybody's keen to get back. It's just life basically getting in the way sometimes. So today we are going to be talking about two films. We are going to be talking later on about the Banshees of Inisherin, but first off we are going to talk about the 2022 horror film Barbarian. Now, Barbarian is directed by Zach Kreffer. It stars Georgina Campbell, Bill Skarsgård and Justin Long. It's almost like a classic combination film here. You're talking about a woman, Tess, played by Georgina Campbell, who turns up at an Airbnb in a rundown area of Detroit late at night, only to find that the place is double booked, and the guy that opens the door is the actor that played Pennywise. So right
Honestly,
away,
that it's the casting. Just the one thing I will say, just when you're going through your synopsis, the casting could not have been any better for this.
So it's almost like a horror checklist that you've got right there. You've got rundown Detroit, you've got known horror characters, and you have women alone in peril. So Tess reluctantly decides to come into the house in order to try and sort out the problem, because she does feel very wary about it, but it's a horrible night and everything, and she just wants to try and get it sorted. So she does go in, and they can't get through to the letting agents to try and figure out what's going on. And then she decides to stay the night. Now, so far, so many horror cliches. You think you know exactly what's going on here, but then it doesn't quite work out that way. It's a bit of a surprise. It was a surprise to me, given that this film went along exactly how I thought for about 45 minutes, and then the rug was pulled away from me, and then almost immediately the rug was pulled away from me again. You're going, okay, what the hell's going on here? But so much for my introduction. Mary, what were your initial thoughts on Barbarian?
Do you know, I completely agree with you. See, for the first 45 minutes to an hour, I was like, oh my God, this is one of the most compelling horrors I've ever seen. She's literally in the I was just waiting for him to do the weekend eye thing, right? And just unhinge his bottom jaw and swallow her whole. I was like, this is so bloody scary. Like every creak of the floor, like every, sort of movement or whatever, I was like, oh my God, something's going to happen. And you were so tense because it had just built up this, these two complete strangers and this, seemingly with a booking mix up, and you're like, but is it a booking mix up or whatever? And there was just no way you were trusting this guy, right? From the offset, you were like, there's something wrong here, but I couldn't ever work out what that wrong thing was. And then after about 45 minutes, it goes completely batshit. And then you think you've sort of found your feet again with it. And then it's just like curveball after curve. I mean, I honestly got to a stage where I was like, what the fuck is going to happen next? Like, there's no way this can go off in any other direction. And I think for me, personally speaking, the first 45 minutes were definitely my favourite sort of part of the film, as it were, because I thought the tension was built really properly. The curveballs were fun in the sense that they kind of brought you sort of in and out of it. But I felt there was a better movie in there for the first bit of it. And then it kind of went off a bit left field. But I mean, there's loads to talk about, so that's the good thing.
Yeah, it has been described as a David Fincher film above and a Sam Raimi film below, for very good reasons. Which actually it's a very, very good description of where things actually go. Yeah, I slightly disagree with you on the first part of it. I think that if it had just continued the way it was, then it would have taken a bit of a dip, because it was using sort of fairly standard horror tropes. I like the fact that you were always looking to catch him out. You were always say, you know, like she would go in and he would say, you know, do you want a glass of wine? And she would go, no. And you say, look, I'll open the bottle in front of you and take a drink so that you don't think I'm trying to slip anything into your drink. And you're thinking, okay, right, so you tick that one off, right? He's not going to try that. And then she says, you know, obviously about like the booking mix-up and all that, and she tries to phone and he tries to phone. And then she says, oh, I've got this booking reference here, you know, do you have anything like that? And he goes, yeah, here you go, yeah, it's right here, you know, that sort of stuff. And then obviously when they're sleeping later on and she gets woken up, she hears a noise and you think, oh, it's him, you know. But he's lying sleeping on the couch, you know, and she actually scares him. So it's, you know, you're waiting for like the shoe to drop here, and it doesn't, because they keep giving you excuses for, no, he's not the guy. But even then, you're thinking, it must be very clever. It must be, you know.
100%. I was looking for, because when he said something about the wine, and he was like, because I know she didn't touch her tea, and I was like, oh, it's in the tea. He's put the roofies in the tea, and then you know he leaves her like the note the next day, and you sort of breathe a sigh of relief because it's daylight, and you're like, oh, thank God, nothing bad ever happens in daylight. And then even just the whole dynamic between them, when, spoilers, she discovers something is not right in the basement, and he's like, just come down with me and check. And I'm like, oh my God, he's going to lock her in the basement and keep her prisoner. This is where this is going. Because they were. I mean, obviously they are spoon feeding you this stuff to make you think that he is. And obviously, as I say, the casting is so perfect, because he literally is. You know, he's Pennywise the clown, for fuck's sake. Like you weren't going into this thinking he'll be the sort of the savior or a good character or whatever. You go in with that previous horror knowledge thinking you're waiting for something to happen.
Yeah, it's used against you, which is always very clever. I've seen a few films like that where they subvert expectations based on the fact that everybody's seen so many horror films now. There's it's the same with a lot of films that you see. If I always think, if you see the likes of a John Wick film, and it's the very first sort of action film you've ever seen, you're going to say, that's the best film in the world. How can you top that? But then you see, you know, 40 years of other action films, and you see where it's taken all its references from, things like that. You go, okay, right. It may be very good, but it may not be the best anymore. And I think this is kind of the same idea. It's taken a lot of reference points that everybody knows and saying, what do you think? And the likes of, you've got like the Scary Stranger, you've got the possibility of a haunted house, you've got a rundown area. Parts of Detroit are obviously a total mess. They have been for years. Not saying the whole city is. I know that's not the case, but it's using all these ideas that have been around for a while, and it's very clever in the way that it uses it.
100%. And I don't know if it's maybe just because of sort of recent, you know, sort of like murders and stuff that have happened, you know, like girls who were, you know, out running or walking home by themselves and stuff. And there's obviously been a lot of focus on, you know, she was just out for, or she was just walking home, all that sort of thing. So I felt like I also went into it with this thing of, you know, Tess comes to the door and she's by herself, and, you know, she can't get through to anyone. And this guy seems on the surface nice and he's doing all the right things, but it was like, I feel like I also brought the knowledge of, you know, stuff that's happened in the news and in real life recently, where you're like all your red flags are like, you know, they're going up, and you feel like you're really
Yeah.
on edge because you're like. And I felt like her character portrayed that as well, because, you know, she's checking the phone and she's checking his ID and she's making sure that he's doing things, you know, as he's pouring the wine in front of her and stuff like that. And I felt like it was kind of, there was a lot of sort of, I don't know, this undercurrent of just like everything that's gone on maybe in the recent past, that I felt like you brought with you to the film to go, yeah, she's a girl by herself. This is dangerous. Like, this is like, you know, red flag central, and Pennywise or not. This is two strangers by themselves. She's a girl, and she's smaller, and she's physically a lot smaller than him, because obviously he's like 6 foot whatever. I just felt all of their conversations, and even just when they were standing talking to, everything just felt so loaded to me, and I just thought that was so well executed, because I felt it really played on quite realistic fears. You know, if you're a female by yourself and you turned up at a location and another male in particular was there, you would not.
Yeah.
You know, it was so well done. I thought it really, really well done.
Yeah, I mean, it was awkward as well, because if you think about it, there's two people who's never actually met, and they're trying to have conversations about, you know, a situation. There's obviously a mix-up. It's going to be awkward because you don't know. There's very few people who can actually just strike up a conversation and make it seem very easy. So it is very awkward as well as frightening at the same time. But you mentioned, obviously, like sort of current events. Now, there is a part in this film where it switches from one story into a second story, and that second story is very much on point for what is going on at the moment. It basically involves a film actor or television actor who is then accused of rape or very inappropriate behaviour. When this second story starts, you kind of go, what's actually happening here? Now, with this character, he's completely unsympathetic. He's just horrible. He's only just out for himself, and it's a really sort of delicious role for somebody to play, and Justin Long does it real sort of. He's really, really good at it. Apparently, Zac Efron was supposed to play that part.
See, that almost takes on a different spin, because you look at it and you look at Bill Skarsgård, and as I say, we bring the horror knowledge with us as well, but also just physically, he just looks like more of a threat. Justin Long almost is kind of this sort of like kind of geeky, but still polished.
Yeah.
But he doesn't. He has this kind of harmless, sort of jovial kind of aura about him. And then, the minute the sort of accusation comes in, he's like, well, she's a fucking bitch. And you're like, oh my God, you are a horrible pet. Like, straight away, you're just like, you know, if you were genuinely, you know, shocked or whatever, you'd be like, why is she, you know, I'm so sorry, why is she saying this or whatever, that never happened. But straight away, he's like, no, she's a bitch and she's a liar. And you're just like, oh, okay, here's the bad guy, as it were, in inverted commas. Like, here's the guy I'm supposed to hate. You know, here's all the red flags, as it were. And I think sometimes for me, it felt a little bit on the nose, I won't lie, but, you know, given the sort of, you know, hyperbole of how horror films often work, he gets away with it, as it were. That kind of character, that kind of really overt characterization. But yeah, I think it's interesting in terms of the writing and stuff like that, that's the kind of themes that they've chosen to sort of go after. Because for me, as I say, the first part of it is very topical in terms of, you know, women alone at night, all that sort of thing. But then to bring in such another really controversial, you know, sort of hot potato topic and sort of bring it into the same film, I was like, wow, this is quite a strong, you know, I'm surprised that little angry white boys haven't come out on Twitter and said, this film's anti-man or whatever. You know, I've not seen anything like that.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's much of a case for them to argue there, because it is a wee angry man. There's nothing really, you know, it's kind of laid out quite clearly that the film itself is not on his side when it comes to this. He's portrayed particularly badly and correctly, obviously, like you say, he's a wee shit. So he shouldn't be have any sort of redeeming qualities and things like that. And that is compounded as the story goes on. Like I won't spoil how the two stories actually merge, but when he's further on and things like that, and he sees some of the same things downstairs, and the first thing he thinks of is, this is extra square footage in the house. This is brilliant.
I must admit that did get a chuckle at the cinema, but I think it was almost like a kind of like, do you know, maybe you're looking for the release and you're looking for the nervous laughter. I think people were kind of, because again, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a scene in a nightclub where he sort of reveals a little bit more about himself, and you're just like, fuck, this film is making me feel like dirty. Do you know what I mean? It was so like just a really odious character. And then, yeah, you do get the sort of relatively light relief where he's downstairs with the tape measure trying to work out square footage in his head. And I think people did sort of raise a chuckle at that at the cinema. But yeah, it was, again, it was kind of over the top sort of grossness, but it was tempered, I think, really well with the fact that there was this dark side to him that you did get to see and you did get to hear. And then the sort of almost comedy badness, as it were, where he's, as I say, down the stairs with the measuring tape.
Yeah, there was also some quite interesting sort of technical aspects of this film. There was various aspect ratio changes as different scenes were unfolding, but there was also a very subtle change in the way that it was actually filmed as well between the two floors. When it was up on the top floor of the Airbnb, it was more sort of a standard setup. It was fixed cameras and, you know, two shots and all this sort of stuff. But then when you go downstairs, it became more handheld, which obviously it made it more enclosed and more suffocating as well, because of the way the camera's right up in somebody's face and it's always moving about and all that. I thought that was very, very clever. And when they did that in conjunction with some terrific sound design and the score as well, it's just, it worked very well together. It was all blended very, very nicely indeed. It was very, very impressive, I thought, which again elevates a film more than just having like a sort of a few stabs of strings and then a quiet bang moment. If you can stay away from that, then you're going to have a much more effective film, because you're not signposting where things are actually going.
Yeah, and as I say, that this is why I think the first sort of the 45 minutes or whatever really worked for me, because there was no jump scares. It was, you know, maybe a door creaking or something. You were sort of just maybe naturally a bit on edge. But yeah, no, I totally agree that when they moved downstairs, I must admit, and I didn't think of myself as particularly claustrophobic or anything like that, but the further they go downstairs, the more I was like, I feel a bit sick. Those walls are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and of course you're getting closer and closer and closer to whoever the actor is. And they're using, what I thought was quite clever was they were using their phones as light as well, so you are getting that sort of, it's a very natural thing. We do use our phones for everything, and actually using it as a torch to look about, I thought worked really well. But yeah, I must admit, because you could almost feel how sort of damp the walls were, and it was, you know, it just felt like this sort of womb-like enclosure, which in itself is fitting for, you know, the main themes of the story. But yeah, it starts off with this kind of sinister thing where you're thinking, okay, one thing's happening downstairs, and then obviously it takes you off in a whole different curveball. But you're right, it was really, really well executed. And again, this sort of blend of, as you say, bringing that horror knowledge, bringing that sort of kind of found footagey type, you know, horror monster movie type of ideal to that particular segment of the film. It works. As I say, I just thought the first hour or so was more entertaining, and to me that was almost the better horror film.
Yeah. So what did you think of the performances then from the two main leads?
So I thought Georgina Campbell as Tess was excellent. Like, I just thought she, you know, as I say, I'm looking at her as, you know, I'm a woman too, and I'm going to, you know, if I went to an Airbnb at night and I was by myself, and, you know, I've traveled for work stuff, you know, alone before, and I always remember there is a tension when you go into a room or whatever by yourself, and you lock the door and you make sure your bag's up against it or whatever. And I felt she was so relatable in the sense that it was just rippling with all of the, as I say, the stuff that's happened in the news. I thought she played it so well. She's wary of Keith, that's, you know, Bill Skarsgård's character, and, you know, I just felt it was really natural, and it wasn't like this kind of, you know, screaming hysterical woman type of thing. It was definitely just a wariness that was always on the surface, but played you know, really well. And as I say, Bill Skarsgård, you know, God love him, no matter how he was like, I'll make you a hot tea, or look, you can show me opening the wine. I was just like, just do the eye thing and get it over. So, yeah, it was interesting. Definitely an interesting role for him, because, you know, you look at the Pennywise stuff, you look at the new trailers for John Wick, he's obviously playing some particular kind of asshole in that as well. Like, this is a really unusual role because he can play it with all of the sort of nudges and winks and is this drugged, is this not? But ultimately, you have to make up your mind as to what type of person Keith is. And that would be, for me, I think as an actor, that would be interesting to go, okay, am I playing this straight and he is just a nice guy, or am I playing it loaded with all of this, oh, is he putting drugs? I thought they worked so well together. And yeah, more of Georgina Campbell, she was excellent. Really, really liked her.
Yeah, she was very good in this. I saw her recently in an Apple TV thing called Suspicion, which was not particularly great. Started off very well. That was a story about 5 people who were accused of kidnapping a teenage boy, and then there's all sorts of stuff that goes on around that. They're accused of basically trying to blackmail this industrialist into telling or giving out some secrets that they've got as well. But it went on far too long. It was only 8 episodes, and it could have been done in about like 4 or 6. Apparently, it was based on an Israeli TV show of the same name. But she was okay in it, but there was a lot that wasn't particularly okay, and unfortunately everybody gets tarred with the same brush with that. But here she is particularly excellent. I think both of them, they didn't overplay the role. It was all very minimal. Obviously, because there was a certain tension, and obviously she was a bit reticent about giving up anything about herself, that she was quite closed off. And in a way he was as well. He was trying his best, but he was trying not to be overly friendly, because then that obviously leads to all sorts of issues, or it can lead to all sorts of issues as well. If he comes across as being almost like too close and everything, that's as awkward as being, slightly shy and everything. So yeah, I thought both of them were particularly good, and it just shows the range that they both have, that they can do things like this. And yet, especially with Bill Skarsgård, because he can go big and he can go small. This is a sort of similar role that he had to, just in terms of the performance in Castle Rock, the Stephen King drama. He was in that, and it was very dialed down, his role in that, to begin with. So it's along the same sort of lines as that, and it was, it just shows his range. And as you say, he's going to show his range even more as potentially a bad guy. I don't think that's really up for debate in the new John Wick film. Based on the trailers, we can say that he's not going to be his pal in that, I don't think.
No, I think honestly, I was really, as I say, I really enjoyed that. And as I say, the Justin Long character, in contrast to those two, probably is a bit more over the top or whatever. But I think that it's obviously playing with that. And as I say, I mean, I'm very interested in the sort of the gender politics and the setup of this film in general. But I think, it's playing around with, who's the nice guy, who's the bad guy, all that sort of thing. And then, what are the consequences of, bad behavior, as it were, or bad guys' behavior. And I did like what it was doing with that and some of the messages it tried to get across. Some of the messages I was really conflicted about. I don't want to go into spoilers, but yeah, some of the messaging I thought was a bit men writing women. If you've ever spent time on that Reddit thread, some of the messaging was a bit. It sort of undid all of the good stuff, but I definitely think that the actors did such a stellar job with, playing it exactly as it needed to be played in order to play around with horror tropes, play around with, the sort of gender politics idea, and also just to play around with the idea of what a horror is and who good characters and bad characters really are. So I thought the performances were all, really, really, everyone was, bringing their A game, as it were.
Excellent. I think we've pretty much covered it, to be perfectly honest here. Myself, yes, I would definitely recommend Barbarian as something that obviously you can't catch it at the cinema anymore. I think if it's there, it's just hanging on. But it will be coming to streaming platforms relatively quickly, I would imagine. It's well worth seeking out. It's a pretty good film. You think so?
Do you know, I would absolutely recommend it, and part of me wants to watch it again, because having thought about it and reflected on it, I still maintain the first bit is the best bit of the movie, but there's so much, there's a lot of layers to it, and actually it's worth unpicking a bit more. So absolutely, I would recommend people to watch it, but don't, maybe go into it willing to sort of have your expectations subverted. I think that's the best bit of advice.
Yes, aye. Go in with an open mind. Try not to use too much of your previous horror knowledge, because you will you will be surprised, which is always a good thing. Okay, right, we shall move on. The second film we're going to discuss today is The Banshees of Inisherin. The film is directed by Martin McDonagh. It stars Brendan Gleeson, Colin Farrell, Kerry Condon, and Barry Keogh. It's been billed in some of the publicity as the return of the team that brought you in Bruges, given that McDonagh, Farrell, and Gleeson all starred in that. But this is a very different beast to that. The film is set on a fictional Irish island of Inisherin in 1923. It's a small community, people who have known each other for years and years, and they are just going on with life while on the mainland the Civil War is raging away, which is brought to screen by the distant sound of gunfire and cannon fire and things like that. And occasionally it stops and occasionally it goes back on, and it has no bearing on the lives of the people on the island. Things like, say, it's almost like a Sleepy Bay Island. People know each other for a long, long time, and Patrick, played by Colin Farrell, and Colm, Brendan Gleeson, have been friends for what seems like a lifetime. And they're in their wee routine of they go to the pub, they chat, and they just got on until one day where Patrick goes to collect Colm in order to go to the pub and finds he's not there, and then finds him later on at the pub, and Colm turns around and says to him, "I don't want to be a friend anymore." And things basically kick off in a quite a low-key way, but things kick off from there. Patrick can't understand why, because they've always been friends, and as several of the locals have said to him, "Have you been rowing?" He says, no, I don't think we've been rowing. And this is basically Colm coming to the realization that he's not getting any younger. He has no legacy. There's nothing for him to pass on, and he feels that that's very important, that there should be something to show for his life. He doesn't have a family. He lives in his own, well, he lives with his dog, and he wants to do something, and he's decided that he's not going to waste his time on meaningless conversations with people who can't contribute to what he is trying to achieve in his last and final days. Now, he's not dying, he's not been diagnosed with anything, but he's just come to a realization that he wants to do something. And from there, the drama expands as Patrick tries to figure out why he's doing it, and Colm initially is quite sympathetic. He tries to put him down gently, tries to basically fob him off, only to find that Patrick is a little more persistent, and things kind of get out of hand from there. Mary, what were your initial impressions of The Banshees of Inisherin?
So this is going to make it sound like a ridiculous comparison, but I had the same sort of cut me to my core reaction to this film as I did with The Worst Person in the World. Mm-hmm. Because there's a kind of similar sort of thing of, what if I had done this and what if I'd done that, and this sort of despair of not knowing what to do with your life and not being sure if you've made the right decisions to date. So I just fell in love with this film. The sort of layer of melancholy that sort of lives over everything, this kind of notion of, what do I leave behind? Have I made the right choices? And this awareness of your own mortality as well, I think, and sort of tied up in this kind of semi sort of, kind of Celtic mysticism and this notion of, obviously like howling banshees and this idea of, there's the creepy elderly woman in the village who seems to know everything and when it's going to happen. I loved the despair of it all. I know that sounds really grim, but I loved how much it took my breath away, and that's kind of what I felt, as I say, when I was watching The Worst Person in the World, is I felt like I'd been winded afterwards. I was like, God, that really, that hurts to think about those kind of things. It's the same kind of effect here. The guy's basically having this sort of, existentialist crisis, and as you say, he's not been told he's dying. He's not sick. There's nothing. He's just suddenly become aware of, but when I'm gone, what happens? And I think that's, there's not a single person in this life who can say they have breezed through life and not thought about that. And it's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. A banshee, for people who don't know, is a fairy from Irish mythology. It's usually someone who heralds or foretells of a death, usually by screaming and wailing, as in the cries of the banshees and things like that. But in this case, all the screaming is more internalized rather than actually out on screen. The old woman that you mentioned is obviously the banshee substitute in this film, because she at one point foretells that, she says, there's going to be a death, and they'll go, away you go, stupid old woman, Mm-hmm. But whether she's right or not, you need to watch the film to find out. So obviously we have two main characters here who, they seem very easy together. There's obviously a shared history between them. Now, what do you make of the fact that, or do you agree with Colm's assertion that you have to leave something? There has to be something left behind in order for your life to have any meaning. Like in his case, he wanted his music to be left. So he was writing a song, mm-hmm. which turns out to be called The Banshees of Inisherin as well. A nice wee touch. It just kind of mixes it all in with the whole big story. But do you think he was actually right in what he was trying to do?
I don't know if it's a case of right or wrong, but I think all of us have ego enough to have point, especially because you look at Colm and you look at Porrick, and they neither of them have children. They're living on this tiny little island. And again, as you said, there's a whole civil war happening on the mainland that literally doesn't touch them. It's not surprising that these two men at various points in the film feel insignificant or feel like they have no agency or, in Colm's case, no legacy. I don't know if it's a case of right or wrong, but I think all of us have at least pondered at least once, will anyone remember me or something like that? I think that's, or if you've ever, lost a relative or whatever, it's this idea of you keep talking about them to keep the memory alive and all that sort of thing. I think that and again, I don't want to give away too much, but, there's scenes between Colm and a parish priest where he talks, he says, how's the despair? And he goes, it's back again. Mm-hmm. And suddenly everything clicked for me. And I was like, oh my God, is this like a suicide thing? Is this why he knows the end is coming? Why he's so desperate to leave something behind? Because he's so trapped in his own mind. And obviously the irony of them being an island where literally you can leave and go anywhere, but they all feel so trapped in this one particular space. I think that for Colm, it's almost less about leaving the music behind and more about taking a little bit of control back about who he is and who he wants to be remembered as opposed to, one half of the double act that all of the villagers and stuff see him as. I think it's about securing something for himself as opposed to being part of the two.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It does seem a little selfish in the way that he goes about it, and just...
Oh, it's horrible! He's a total shit to his friend, yeah.
Cutting him off completely, just saying, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Yeah. Because that's... No matter who you do that, obviously the character of Patrick is made out to be a more of a simple soul. He's not an idiot. By no means is he an idiot. He knows what's happening, but he doesn't understand, because friendships is based on mutual admiration and the ability to talk to each other, and then suddenly that's taken away for something that he hasn't done. There's no reason as far as he can see behind it, and that's obviously what starts to increase the tension actually within the story, because he is trying to figure out what is actually going on and why it's going on. And at first he tries different methods. He tries to reconcile with him, tries to be his friend, and it doesn't work. And then he's told, well, maybe you have to seize the moment. You have to be the angry one. So he tries that, and that doesn't work either. So it spirals out of control that way. But I really liked the fact that even though Patrick is a simple soul, he's not one-dimensional. He's not two-dimensional. He's like fully formed. He does what he does because it's a comfort to him. He likes the life he's living. It's very straightforward. He likes going to the pub in the afternoon after he's finished his work, and he likes chatting to people, and he likes just getting on. He's got no real ambitions outside of that, but he doesn't feel slighted because of that. Now, everybody else around him have their issues. Obviously, Colm has his sister, who he lives with. They've lived in the same wee sort of two-bed cottage for years since their parents died, and they've just kept it on. He's perfectly happy to do that. His sister, on the other hand, no, she is almost cursed with the same intelligence as Colm. She thinks a wee bit more deeply about things. She reads books. She has a greater understanding of the world, and she wants to be involved in it. So she has her own problems, the same way that Colm has problems. And there's the other character of Dominic, who is initially portrayed as being the sort of village idiot character. And then when you get into his story a wee bit, you realise why he acts the way he does, because it deflects from all the shit that's going on in his life as well, which is frankly horrible, the stuff. And this is all just sort of side stories to this main sort of friendship, and you're going, this happened really subtly. It's not all thrown at you the one time. It's over the course of about an hour. You get all these wee side stories just dripping in. You get to understand Podrick. You get to understand that he's a really nice guy, because he understands that a lot of the time people just want somebody to talk to and they want a bit of comfort. And when he can't get that from Colm, he gets that from Jenny, his donkey, who he keeps bringing into the house because it's cold outside and she likes the company, you know. So it's actually quite a layered film. When you look at it at the start, you think it's going to be quite a sort of straightforward story, beautifully shot, beautifully made, but it's going to be quite straightforward. But it's not. It's really, really deep. And it's so much better for that. But it's a film that you have to pay attention to. You can't. It's not one of these films that you can sit at home and just watch and have something else in the go at the same time. You could be, doing your Sudoku on your phone or whatever, because you'll get halfway through the film and you'll be going, why is he doing that? What's happening there? Because you really need to get into the flow of it in order to pick up all the wee bits, because it's all very subtly done. There's no great speech after 20 minutes, which gives you all the exposition you need.
You need to get into the flow of village life, of what it's like to live and work, and literally the whole, going to the other side of the island to get your groceries with the nosy old bitches opening all your mail before you get it. Like, you need to get into that flow of what it's like and why this is such a loss for Porrick, who is really happy tending his donkey, going to the pub, letting the donkey in at night and saying goodnight to his sister, because he's, in a way, I almost felt like that sort of rhythm that he'd got into was obviously to cope with the fact that they'd lost both of their parents, and having this, being in the same house, in the same parlour, in the same bedroom or whatever, that was obviously really, really comforting for, such a great loss. Whereas obviously his sister, Siobhan, she's, it's almost like, in a way, the women in the shop are spiteful to her, because it's like, how dare she have dreams and how dare she want to go and better herself, very sort of, Irish 1920s mentality. And then obviously you've got Dominic as well, who, Barry Keoghan, like, how dare you make me cry in the cinema? Like, his character. And the thing is, he's presented as such a kind and gentle. So although he is going to set up as this village idiot, you realise, like, there's literally not a bad bone in him, as they say. And even when he's saying, like, my dad hit me with the kettle, but then he get annoyed because I'd put a dent in the kettle, sort of thing. Like, you're just like, Jesus, your home life is so awful. And then, but at the same time, he's, obviously trying to crack into girls in the pub and all the rest of it. And, and he's saying, like, putting two fingers up to the idea of going to church on Sunday. And there was a couple of lines that he said that really did make me laugh. But at the same time, I was like, fuck, I shouldn't be laughing at that. Like, what is going on in your house? But he was incredible. And again, like, a really, really small part when you look at the runtime of the film and how much time he was actually on screen, but just really adding to the impact of, this island, this feels like a trap. It was really like, it almost sort of brought the walls in, as it were. He was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, these sort of roles, the likes of the Barry Keogh role, is almost like a gateway role. It can show his versatility. So that's how he's going to get like major. I know he's been in major films and he was in the Batman, and
or was he? Dun, 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 dun.
And obviously he was in the Killing of a Sacred Deer as well, along with Colin Farrell. So
yes,
he's got a great range, and
he's
a fantastic actor. So yeah,
really incredible. I mean, I must admit, Chris would love it if I would stop saying you sitting there with your big brown cock. He would love that if that would stop. But it was honestly one of the funniest. Like they walk in, his dad's obviously sitting there, and he's like, "Oh, we'll have to be quiet if he's been at the wink." And like, imagine actually saying that about your dad when you're going in to see it. Like I said, there were so many lines where I was just pissing myself laughing, but at the same time, I was like, actually, I'm laughing at that. That's just revealed so much about, what's going on in your house or your head or whatever. Like it was humor, but humor that you actually went, oh, that's not funny. That's really terrible what's going on. So, I mean, I obviously am a big fan of Martin McDonagh, but the script here is just like, I mean, you're right. You have to strap in and focus and, concentrate on, as I say, being drawn into this life in Inisherin. But there's so many lines that, as I say, take your breath away just by you laugh at them and then you go, oh, fuck, no, that's grim. That's absolutely grim. What's going on there? So, yeah.
Yeah, again, those sort of lines work in two ways. Like you say, it highlights the fact that maybe I shouldn't be laughing, but also it's a wee release of tension as well, because you've had a passage of like dialogue that is really very dark. And then especially like as the film progresses, it gets darker and darker in terms of the subject matter. And like you say, it's all about Colm and his state of mind. With his depression and the
despair, and it's like the despair becomes like palpable, as in like the despair is almost a character in itself, because you're right, it gets darker and darker and darker, and you're just like, where does that, like, how does this end? Because it's just, it's destructive, but at the same time, it's like there is this kind of, as I say, this almost kind of poetry to it, this philosophical thinking of who am I, what do I leave behind, and it's, you get swept up in the sort of the beauty of the island and the sort of the process of thinking, but at the same time there is this like literal darkness that is coming. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it was very much emphasised by the score as well, because for the first 30-40 minutes it's quite light. It's Irish airs type of
about jigging,
it's all that sort of stuff. But then as it progresses, the tone gets darker and it gets more sort of ominous, and it fits in with obviously the visuals on screen, which it's not always noticed. It's just sort of taken for granted, but it's really something that you think they've worked on that. That's an idea that they've had, and they've sort of gone with it from day one. Let's just change it, it's almost like turning down the brightness as
100%. Yeah.
It's kind of scary, I thought, the way that they did that, but yeah, it was excellent. So obviously we've talked about Barry Keogh's character. What about Kerry Condon? What did you think of her as Siobhan?
There was so much of it where I was just like, because she's meant to be in her 20s, late 20s, early 30s sort of thing.
Yes.
So, but again, she's oh my God, she's unmarried. Oh my God, she's unmarried and she's in her 30s or whatever. But of course, at the time, it was like, she may as well have been dead in terms of options, because it was unusual for women to be working. It was unusual for women to be making their own choices, and in her case, to choose not to be married, because it's quite clear that everyone talks about her as being, you know, beautiful, intelligent, because they all kind of rub sort of Porrick up and say, how is that your sister, sort of thing. So I was completely fascinated by the fact that she'd clearly made some choices in her life about who she was and who she wasn't. And the fact that, you could tell it was taking literally all of her to even think about applying for a job that would literally mean, you know, to be surrounded by books all day, which is the dream. It really is the dream.
Of course it is, yeah.
And so for her to give of herself, to achieve what she wanted, she had to give up something of herself, and that something of herself obviously was life in Inisherin, and it's life with Porrick. So, yeah, I mean, you could see the conflict she was going through, but at the same time, she was just quietly strong. As I say, you're aware of the choices that she's made or the choices that she's not made because of the situation that she finds herself in. And that, again, another layer of like fascinating, because, you know, there are women in the village who probably at her age had like 25 kids and a husband that spent all day in the pub, but she was making these choices for herself. And that must have, like, genuinely, you know, you kind of wants to applaud her, because like for a woman at that time, especially in rural Ireland, like it must have been impossible, and yet here she was doing it. It just felt so like empowering in a way to watch her go and achieve what she wanted to.
Yeah, because there was a couple of scenes where she was invited by her brother to go to the pub, and she was delighted because then it was something to do. She was going out of the house and all that. But then the visits to the pub would end up being her in the middle of their argument. She was trying to be sort of an arbiter between them. So even though she was trying to sort out her own problems, she was getting embroiled on her brother's problems as well, which didn't do her any favours, let's say, because it just meant that there was so much pressure on her. Now, one of the solutions that she came up with for that was, she said to Porrick, come with me. There's nothing here for you anymore. You know, you could do what you're doing somewhere else. It doesn't necessarily need to be here, fresh start and all that. But he couldn't do that. His life was there. That's what he knew. That's not just what he knew, but it's what he wanted to know. He didn't want to know about what was going on in the mainland and everything, because he liked the pace of Ireland life. He liked the fact that it was quite contained, and you know everybody, and you know where you stand. You know that you can get away with certain things. You know you don't talk to the woman in the shop because she thrives on gossip as well as opening up everybody's letters, which I thought was illegal, but you know, hey ho. Yeah.
She there was the fact she used the steamer, and she was like, well, it's because you don't tell me anything, as if that was justification for reading her letters.
Yeah, and she didn't even steam them properly back closed and things like that. It's just, oh man. Yeah. And she was that excited when somebody got a letter that she would say what the contents of it were, and say, and what do you think about that? You know, are you going to take that job? Before she even got the chance to.
I know, and she's standing there with the opened envelope cone. You can just see she was just like, what the fuck? Like, how do you know what's in the envelope? But yeah, but at the same time, it's like, and in a way, yeah, you can draw parallels between Siobhan and Colm, because obviously she wants more than, you know, that life, and Colm wants that legacy, or to be known as more than, you know, just the guy that played the fiddle in the pub in Inisherin. But Porrick doesn't want that. He thrives on the routine and the safety and the, as you say, people know him and he can get away with this, that, and the next thing. But at the same time, he was never made out to be like small-minded or insular or unintelligent or anything like that. It was just, this is just his life and he's just happy with it. It was never a derogatory thing, you know.
Yeah, it was never. Well, it was relationship between Colm and Podrick was never sort of a relationship of equals, but it doesn't need to be a relationship. Doesn't need to be that way. You don't need to be on the same sort of level, like intellectually or educationally, in order to get on with people. And Podrick obviously felt. I think you would be at the top end of that rather than me here. But thanks for making me lose my train of thought. I'm so sorry. No, what I was going to say is, like, it didn't matter to Podrick. No. He knew that his friend was a thinker. He was a musician. He obviously was well read, and he understood a bit more about the world. But like say, Podrick didn't really want that. He was happy.
And although they kind of make the joke about, I think Colin turns at one point and is like, if I have to listen to one more conversation about what your donkey's shit looks like on the living room floor, and then he's like, well, it was stringy, not whatever, and he was trying to sort of shout back, whatever. But at the same time, like that, like he says to Colin, like, we don't have to, like, not everything has to be this deep and meaningful conversation. Like, why can't we just chat? And it's like, yeah, sometimes you do. You just need someone who you can just chat to, and it doesn't have to be about the, and it's interesting that I think that, Colin is looking for deep and meaningful, because I'm just, I'm thinking, like, what were, guys like in the early 1920s in rural Ireland? I can't imagine there was much chat about feelings and stuff like that. And that's why there is so much of this kind of lurking under the surface. But
yeah,
so in that sense, Colin is the sort of irregularity here. Do you know what I mean? Because he wants depth, as it were.
Yeah, that's right. He doesn't want to leave in order to fulfill what he wants to do. He wants to do it there. It is selfish in a way, that the way that he does it, but it's understandable why he wants to do it. But he's obviously looking at it from the point of view that he needs something to prove his legacy rather than just himself being his legacy. I mean, obviously, we're going to have a legacy in that down the line. People will be saying, why was the Moviescramble podcast not popular? Because it's so good.
Oh, that is absolutely hysterical. But I mean, do you not think though, like, in a way, like, just just like, it's a very, in a way, like, and I know he gives his reference of, like, is it Mozart that he says, that they all remember his name and stuff like that. But in a way, like, it's a very modern, like, problem, or not problem, but I think, because, people do have, like, they have YouTube channels, or they have podcasts, or they're influencers or whatever. It's all about, ego and all that sort of thing. And it's a very modern problem, but obviously framed in this sort of very early sort of turn of the century way. And it is, people are still looking for something to leave behind, whether it's, 1920s Ireland or now. Like, people do want, of course you do, you want to be remembered. You don't want to just fade into oblivion. But obviously his thing was, like, not just being remembered in that village, but being remembered beyond, for being this great sort of, I was going to say fiddler. That is the right word, but it just sounds weird in this context.
It does, yes, totally. But that conversation that he was having when he was saying that about Mozart, and then Siobhan corrects him because he gets the century. He's making this big speech about, obviously that he knows about Mozart and everything, but then he gets the century wrong, that he was actually around, and Siobhan corrects him, but she doesn't do it right away. She waits till he's finished, because she's respectful of him, yet she wants to point out, you may think you know stuff, but there are other people who know more than you do. So, just bear that in mind just for a couple of minutes while you're putting somebody down because they don't know about the outside world and things like that. So I thought that was very nicely done. It was quite subtle. The way
and
that
again,
was kind of dropped in there.
Yeah, and definitely more sort of evidence of her, like, sense of self and power, because she didn't need to make a big scene. It was just like, well, actually, it was just kind of like this wee sort of bomb dropped at the end, and then, off she went to go and, get Porrick or whatever, who in the meantime was like, well, I've actually never heard of Mozart, so this speech is a waste of time, sort of thing.
Nice. So, obviously, it was shot on an island. But it was obviously the island was fictionalized. What did you think of the use of locations? Did you think that kind of worked well?
I loved it. Do you know, the thing is, I always remember my mum talking about my grand's village in Ireland, which is like literally a street long, exactly like this, with the pub at the end of it, and even the house set up with the parlour and then like the rooms off it and stuff like that was something that. But just because of, my family trees, it was something that feels very familiar because it's always been talked about in that way. But I think they made the most of the fact that it's not like they're neighbours and everyone's on top of each other. There's huge space between the houses and the pub and the shop, because you have to go to the other side of the island and stuff like that to get to it. So there is all this open space, and there's obviously lots of overhead shots of the island and beautiful, sort of rolling hills and all that sort of thing. But at the same time, it does feel like everybody's on top of each other. So it's really well done, because they're using these visuals to show how sparsely populated the place is and how much of a pain in the arse it is to go and get your milk and bread and all the rest of it. But at the same time, there is this, like, you know exactly what's going on at every point in that island, because you do have these communal hubs like the pub or the grocers or whatever. And I think in a way, kind of cheesy, obviously community spirit, people looking out for each other. There is a kind of safety in this, you know, people knowing who you are and all that sort of thing, but also just how stifling that can be as well. So it really plays perfectly with everything that he's trying to convey in the script.
Yeah, totally agree with you. I thought it was very nicely done, and that it complemented the story, like you say, with the wide open spaces, and yet everybody's on top of each other and everybody knows everybody else's business. Without without even having things like telephones, people knew what was going on within hours, because somebody, like at the very start, Patrick goes to the pub and basically tells everybody that Colm's not talking to him, so everybody knows then. So and so it's like gossip just gets around from that, and then other people are saying, "Oh, here, you're not talking to him anymore," and that kind of thing. So it's and Colm has this sort of very brusque manner about him when he's walking. It's very deliberate. It's like the long coat on, the hat on, head down, you know, striding with purpose. But I mean, he's going to the pub, or he's, you know, he's not doing anything ultimately important, but he's obviously trying to, don't know, it's almost like bettering yourself by like physical movement and how you present yourself as well, you know.
But also, I feel it's sort of given this kind of like slightly standoffish thing, because it was very like, it was closed off, like body language and costuming and all the rest of it. And what I couldn't about halfway through, I was sitting thinking, he's still in the bloody pub every day. Why couldn't he just stayed friends with him? He could do his music in the morning and stay friends with him in the afternoon. And I was starting to get really annoyed with him. But I think it was this, and yeah, the way he moved, the way he conducted, everything was very like, you know, it was like, you know, he would shrug the coat on or the hat, and it, as you say, it was head down and walk, and everything about him, it just felt that kind of abrasive way. And it did sort of at times make you go, oh, he's been a total shit. Like, whereas Colin Farrell's character is obviously, as I say, very affable, very chatty, and all that sort of, you know, typical sort of Irish charm, or whatever you want to call it. And so you do direct these feelings of you are being a dick to Brendan Gleeson's character, but at the same time, he has these really beautiful moments in this, you know, confessional box, which, I mean, the priest is probably telling everybody what you've done and all, but at the same time, it was just that heartbreak of, the despair's back again. You're like, fuck, okay, it's not that you're being terrible, it's that you're actually just, you know, your mind is sort of letting you down, as it were, or you're clearly struggling with your mental health, and you change your feelings about the character a lot. But you're right, everything about his physicality, at first you're like, oh, no, you're not, because whereas Colin Farrell sort of striding along, really congenial, that sort of thing, he just has this very closed and sharp and just a mean boy.
What did you think of Colin Farrell's knitwear?
Oh my god! If we all thought that what Chris Evans did for the cable knit sweater and Knives Out, I swear to God, I've already seen people on Twitter going, "Where can I get a red jumper with a collar?" Like the Banshees of Inisherin. Like, he somehow made 1920s rural Ireland look a bit sexy. Won't lie.
Yeah.
The knitwear was cool.
Yeah, it was definitely on point. Yeah, it was. Apparently, it was made especially for him. It's somebody that does that.
Oh, it'll be somebody's wee granny who still lives in a cottage like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
what I thought was. On you go, sorry.
No,
all I
go.
was going to say is, he was in much warmer colours as well. So obviously you do have the red sweater and stuff like that, whereas, you know, obviously very, very obvious, and this is like film criticism 101 here, whereas, you know, Colin was constantly in blacks and browns and greys. And to be fair, the vast majority of people were, because bright colours weren't really a thing at that time, but just a couple of splashes of his knitwear or maybe a shirt or something like that was definitely a much warmer shade of maybe like an orange or a burgundy or something like that obviously was supposed to draw you into his character.
Yeah, no, definitely, yeah. So the film has been universally praised, as far as I can see, based on what I've been looking at, and there's every chance that it's going to be up there in consideration for awards. I personally think it's well worth a shout for both actors and definitely the director, because Obviously, the director wrote it as well, so there's
Mhm.
an awful lot of him in that, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was talked about at the very least come award season.
Oh, I think there's call for both Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson. What will be interesting to see is if they put them up for both for Best Actor, because for me, Barry Keoghan, Best Supporting Actor, that should absolutely be a thing. He should absolutely walk away with an Oscar or a BAFTA or whatever. But it'll be interesting to see if they pitch both, as I say, Farrell and Gleeson as Best Actor. I definitely think Martin McDonagh will get a lot of attention. Obviously, Three Billboards did really well for Frances McDormand and stuff like that as well. So he kind of fascinates me as a filmmaker and a writer. You know, he's obviously tackled these, you know, big sort of sweeping issues with Three Billboards, and this film feels almost like quiet and contained, and yet at the same time it is dealing with really, really big issues, as it were. So yeah, no, I would love to see this sweep the boards, quite honestly.
Yeah, it's just films about ordinary people in rural and not sort of fast-paced settings. Even the likes of In Bruges was like that, because it was like two guys hiding out. It wasn't an action film in any way. It was very much a character piece. So yes, I would like to see it getting some recognition that way, as well as obviously the recognition it's got in terms of being a success at the box office and critical success as well. So I take it you would recommend this film?
I think this might be my film of the year so far.
Ooh.
So absolutely, yes. I think, do you know, it's funny because I saw this and Western Front within a week of each other, and I was like, oh, Western Front, film of the year. And then I saw this and I was like, actually, it might be Banshees. So yeah, I absolutely recommend it. It's just quietly heartbreaking. I loved it.
Yep. I would agree with you in that it's one of the films of the year. Definitely up there. I haven't been anywhere near my list yet in terms of figuring out what's going to be on it, but I can pretty much guarantee that this will be there. Put it this way, I can't think of 10 other films that are better than it that I've seen this year. So
I know,
yeah,
right? I mean, that's the thing. It's fantastic. I think it'll top a lot of critics' lists, put it that way. But that's not a bad thing. Like I like when films like this. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not naive enough to think that this didn't cost, like, you know, it wasn't made for a $5. Like, I'm not. There was obviously budget and stuff involved there. But I love when films like this that do feel that little bit more contained and that little bit smaller do so well and really touch. And it's touching people because, you know, we've all felt these things. I think that's, you know, testament to his writing as well, to really draw that out of his audience.
Yep, totally. So that's us. We are done. Another podcast under the belt. I believe this is 51, maybe. I think
yeah.
Done, yeah. So
yeah,
we're over the hump, over the 50 hump.
Considering the most 100.
Yeah, considering that most podcasts only last about 10 episodes. And then
what a breeze. We're smashing it.
Yeah, we've found so much more to talk about than we initially thought. So that's it for us this time. You can find us at all the normal social media channels. And if you want to get in touch with us, please get hold of us on Twitter, whatever. You can also email us at podcast@moviescramble.co.uk if you've got any suggestions. I know that a certain person from the Bang Bang podcast has been actively campaigning to come on, and I don't know if we'll talk about Lyle Crocodile, but we'll definitely get something arranged with him. Obviously with Mr. Simpson back in fold as well. That would be pretty good, since we've two people who know what they're talking about in terms of wrestling, and there's maybe two people who don't really know what they're talking about in terms of wrestling. But yes, please get in touch with us if you've got any suggestions for anything you would like us to cover. We are probably going to cover All Quiet on the Western Front next, given that Mary has seen it and loved it, and I am going to try and catch it over the weekend on Netflix. So we shall hopefully be doing a re-record of that over the next week, and there's always plenty coming out, so I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about then as well. So from myself and from young Mary, who's an awful lot younger than I am, I shall see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.